Wife left me after my parents died to be with her boss who promised her half of my $11 million trust fund, but she had no idea my parents made sure no spouse could ever touch that money. My parents died in a car accident 3 months ago, and my wife Lisa left me 2 weeks later for her boss Marcus, who owns the company where she works. She moved out while I was at the funeral home making arrangements for my mom and dad, and when I got home that night all her stuff was gone and there was a note on the kitchen counter that said she needed space to figure things out and that she was staying with a friend. I called her phone about 50 times but she never answered, so I drove to her sister's house, and her sister Lisa just stood in the doorway and said Lisa didn't want to talk to me and that I should give her time to think. The next morning Lisa showed up at my house with Marcus in his BMW, and they both came to the front door, and Lisa said she was in love with Marcus and that she had been unhappy in our marriage for 2 years and that my parents dying made her realize life was too short to stay in a relationship that wasn't working. Marcus just stood there nodding, and he had his hand on Lisa's back the whole time like he was protecting her from me, and I asked Lisa how long this had been going on, and she said it started as an emotional affair about 8 months ago but became physical 3 months ago, which was right around when my dad got his cancer diagnosis. I told them both to get off my property, and Lisa said she wasn't done talking and that she knew about the family trust fund that my parents left me and that she was entitled to half of everything since we were married when they died. Marcus jumped in and said that Lisa had contributed to our household for 6 years and that she deserved to be compensated for her investment in our marriage, and I just started laughing because these two idiots had no idea how trust funds work or what my parents actually left me. Lisa got mad when I laughed and she started yelling that I always treated her like she was stupid and that she knew her rights and that her lawyer was going to make sure she got what she was owed. Marcus told me I should be reasonable and work something out with Lisa so we could all move forward amicably, and I told him to shut his mouth and get off my property before I called the police. Lisa said I was being cruel and that she expected better from me even though our marriage was over, and Marcus said they were just trying to handle this maturely. I went inside and slammed the door and watched them from the window as they stood in my driveway arguing with each other, and Lisa kept pointing at the house and Marcus kept shaking his head, and then they got in his car and drove away. Lisa called me that night and said she was disappointed in how I handled things and that she was going to have her attorney contact me about the divorce proceedings and the trust fund distribution, and I hung up on her. The next week Lisa's lawyer sent me papers demanding disclosure of all assets including the trust fund and requesting an emergency hearing to freeze all accounts until the divorce was finalized. I took the papers to my family's attorney Robert, who has been handling our legal matters for 30 years, and he just started laughing when he read what Lisa's lawyer was asking for. Robert explained that my parents set up an irrevocable trust when I was 25 years old that specifically excluded any spouse or future spouse from having any claim to the assets, and that even if Lisa and I stayed married for 50 years she would never have any legal right to a single penny from the trust. Robert said my parents were very smart about protecting family wealth and that they had seen too many families lose everything to divorces and bad marriages, so they made sure the trust was bulletproof. The trust includes the family house where I grew up, which is worth about $2.8 million, a rental property portfolio worth about $4.2 million, investment accounts with about $3.1 million, and the life insurance payouts from my parents' deaths, which added another $1.5 million to the trust. Lisa thinks she is going to get half of about $11.6 million, but she is going to get absolutely nothing, and neither is her boyfriend Marcus, who probably thinks he hit the jackpot by stealing another man's wife. Robert filed a response to Lisa's lawyer explaining that the trust assets are completely protected from any spousal claims and that Lisa has no standing to request disclosure of trust information or freeze any accounts. He also filed for divorce on my behalf, citing adultery and requesting that Lisa pay all legal fees since she was the one who cheated and left the marriage. Lisa's lawyer called Robert screaming about how this wasn't fair and that Lisa was being taken advantage of, and Robert just calmly explained the law and told him to advise his client that she would be getting nothing from the trust fund. I haven't heard from Lisa since the lawyers started talking, but I saw her driving around town in Marcus's BMW and she looked like she was living her best life, thinking she was about to become a multi-millionaire. Marcus has been posting pictures on his business social media of expensive dinners and weekend trips, and I can tell he thinks he upgraded his lifestyle by getting with my wife. What they don't know is that Robert is preparing a detailed explanation of exactly why Lisa has no claim to any trust assets and how much money she will actually be receiving from our divorce, which is basically just half of our joint checking account that has about $4,800 in it and half of the equity in our house that we bought together, which after the mortgage payoff will give her about $35,000. I also found out from my neighbor that Marcus has been telling people around town that he and Lisa are planning to travel Europe this summer and maybe buy a vacation house somewhere tropical once Lisa's divorce settlement comes through. My neighbor said Marcus was bragging at the golf course about how Lisa was going to be worth millions and how lucky he was to find someone like her. I almost feel bad for how stupid they both are, but then I remember that Lisa cheated on me while my dad was dying of cancer and left me right after I buried my parents, so they both deserve whatever is coming to them. The house feels empty without Lisa, but I'm not missing her as much as I thought I would, and maybe that means our marriage really was broken like she said. I'm just focusing on getting through each day and dealing with all the legal paperwork and estate stuff from my parents and trying not to think about Lisa and Marcus spending time together in what used to be my life. Robert says the divorce should be finalized in about 2 months and that Lisa will probably try to contest the trust fund ruling but that she has no legal grounds and will just be wasting more money on lawyer fees. I keep thinking about how smug Marcus looked standing in my driveway with his hand on Lisa's back like he had won some kind of prize and how confident Lisa seemed when she was demanding her share of money that she has no right to, and I know that when they find out the truth about the trust fund they are both going to lose their minds. I just have to wait and let the legal process play out and then watch them realize that their whole plan was based on completely wrong information and that Lisa traded a marriage for basically nothing. Update 1. Marcus called me yesterday and wanted to meet for coffee to talk man to man about the situation with Lisa and the divorce proceedings. I told him I had nothing to say to him, but he kept insisting that we needed to clear the air and work things out like adults and that he was concerned about how hostile I was being toward Lisa during the legal process. He said Lisa was stressed out about the divorce and that she felt like I was being vindictive by making things difficult and that he thought if we could just talk face to face we could resolve everything amicably. I finally agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown just so I could see what kind of nonsense he was going to try to sell me, and when I got there he was already sitting at a corner table wearing an expensive suit and looking like he thought he was conducting some kind of business negotiation. He stood up and tried to shake my hand and I just sat down across from him and asked him what he wanted, and he started going into this whole speech about how he never meant for things to happen the way they did and how he and Lisa tried to fight their feelings, but sometimes love just can't be denied. Marcus said he respected me as a man and that he knew this situation was painful for me, but that he hoped I could understand that Lisa was unhappy in our marriage long before he came into the picture and that they were just following their hearts. He said he wanted to make sure there were no hard feelings between us and that he was hoping we could find a way to move forward that worked for everyone, and I just stared at him and asked him if he was serious, and he said he was completely serious about wanting to handle this with integrity and respect. I told Marcus that he was a piece of garbage who stole another man's wife while her husband was dealing with his parents dying and that there was no scenario where I would ever have anything but contempt for him and Lisa. Marcus got defensive and said that Lisa made her own choices and that nobody forced her to leave me, and that maybe if I had been a better husband she wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere for emotional support. He said relationships are complicated and that sometimes people grow apart and that he was just there for Lisa when she needed someone to care about her. I asked Marcus if Lisa had told him about the trust fund money she was expecting to get from the divorce, and his whole face lit up and he said that Lisa had mentioned she would be receiving a substantial settlement that would allow them to start their new life together without financial stress. Marcus said he wasn't with Lisa for money and that he had his own successful business, but that he was excited about the opportunities they would have once the divorce was finalized and Lisa received her inheritance from my family. I started laughing and told Marcus that Lisa wasn't getting any money from my family trust fund and that she would be lucky to walk away with $40,000 total from our entire divorce. Marcus looked confused and said that couldn't be right because Lisa's lawyer had assured her that she was entitled to half of all marital assets including the trust fund, and I told him that Lisa's lawyer was either lying to her or completely incompetent because the trust was set up specifically to exclude spouses from any claims. Marcus said I was lying and trying to cheat Lisa out of what she was legally owed, and I pulled out my phone and showed him the legal documents that Robert had prepared explaining exactly why Lisa has no claim to any trust assets. I watched Marcus's face change as he read through the paperwork and saw the total value of the trust and realized that Lisa was going to get absolutely nothing from the $11 million that my parents left me. Marcus started getting angry and said it wasn't fair that Lisa was being punished for falling in love and that she had contributed to our household for 6 years and deserved to be compensated for her time and effort. I told him that marriage isn't a business contract where you get paid for your time and that Lisa chose to cheat and leave so she gets to deal with the consequences of her choices. Marcus said I should do the right thing and share some of the trust money with Lisa even if I wasn't legally required to. I told Marcus that he was out of his mind if he thought I would give Lisa 1 penny of my family's money after she betrayed me and abandoned me during the worst time of my life, and that maybe he should have thought about the financial implications before he started sleeping with a married woman. Marcus said I was making a mistake and that Lisa was a good person who deserved better treatment, and that he was disappointed in how petty I was being about money that I didn't even earn myself. I stood up and told Marcus that this conversation was over and that he and Lisa could enjoy their relationship, but they weren't getting any money from me and that they better start making plans based on his company's salary instead of the millions they thought they were going to get. Marcus said he wasn't done talking and that Lisa was going to fight this in court and that we would see what a judge had to say about the trust fund, and I told him to waste as much money as he wanted on lawyer fees because the trust was ironclad and Lisa would never see a dime. I left Marcus sitting at the coffee shop looking like someone had just punched him in the stomach, and I could tell he was starting to realize that his whole plan was falling apart. When I got home I called Robert and told him about the conversation, and he just laughed and said that Marcus and Lisa were about to learn a very expensive lesson about family trusts and divorce law. Robert said Lisa's lawyer had already filed 2 more motions trying to challenge the trust structure and that each motion was costing Lisa more money and legal fees that she would never recover. Robert also told me that he had done some research on Marcus's business and that it wasn't as successful as Marcus liked to pretend, and that his company was basically a one-man operation with a few part-time contractors. Robert said Marcus was probably counting on Lisa's money to expand his business and maybe buy a bigger office and hire more employees, and that he was going to be very disappointed when he found out Lisa was bringing nothing to their relationship except debt from her divorce attorney. I drove past Marcus's office building yesterday and saw him and Lisa in the parking lot having what looked like a very intense conversation, and Lisa was waving her hands around and pointing at Marcus, and he was shaking his head and looking frustrated. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it was obvious they were fighting about something, and I'm guessing Lisa is starting to realize that Marcus isn't as wealthy as she thought and that their European vacation plans might need to be cancelled. Lisa called me that night and left a voicemail saying that Marcus told her about our conversation and that she couldn't believe I was being so selfish about money that belonged to both of us, and that she was going to keep fighting until she got what she deserved. She said I was making a huge mistake by trying to cheat her out of the trust fund, and that her lawyer was confident they could prove the trust was invalid or that I had somehow violated the terms by getting married. Robert says Lisa's lawyer is just taking her money and giving her false hope because there is absolutely no way to challenge the trust, and that every motion they file just proves how desperate and uninformed they are about estate law. I'm just waiting for Lisa and Marcus to burn through all their savings on legal fees and then watch them realize that their whole relationship was based on a lie about money that was never going to be theirs. Update 2. Lisa and Marcus went to Italy for 10 days and came back yesterday acting like they were living in some kind of romantic movie and thinking they were about to collect millions of dollars from my family trust fund. They must have spent a fortune on that trip because Lisa was posting pictures of expensive restaurants and luxury hotels, and Marcus was showing off some kind of designer watch that probably cost more than most people make in a month. I guess they figured they could afford to splurge since they thought Lisa's big payout was coming any day now. Lisa showed up at my house this morning without calling first, and she was wearing a new designer dress and carrying shopping bags from expensive Italian stores, and she looked like she had just stepped off a magazine cover. She started talking about how amazing Italy was and how she and Marcus were thinking about buying a villa in Tuscany once the divorce settlement came through, and how they had already put a deposit down on a boat they wanted to purchase for weekend trips. I asked Lisa what she wanted, and she said she was there to discuss the trust fund situation and that her lawyer had told her that Robert was being unreasonable about the asset disclosure and that she needed me to be more cooperative about sharing the financial information. Lisa said she understood that I was hurt about our marriage ending, but that she hoped I would do the right thing and not try to hide money that legally belonged to both of us, and that she was willing to be generous and only take 40% of the trust instead of the full 50% she was entitled to. I told Lisa that she wasn't entitled to any percentage of the trust fund and that her lawyer should have explained that the trust assets were completely protected from spousal claims, and Lisa just laughed and said that Robert was lying to me and that no trust was completely bulletproof, and that her lawyer had found several legal precedents where trusts had been successfully challenged in divorce proceedings. She said she had done her own research while she was in Italy and that she was confident about her legal position and that I should stop playing games and start negotiating in good faith. Lisa pulled out a folder full of papers and said her lawyer had prepared a settlement proposal that would give her $4.5 million from the trust fund plus half of our joint assets plus alimony payments for 3 years plus coverage for all her legal fees. She said this was a fair and reasonable offer considering she had contributed 6 years of her life to our marriage, and that I should be grateful she wasn't asking for the full amount she was legally entitled to receive. I took the settlement papers and threw them in my trash can and told Lisa that she was delusional if she thought she was getting any money from the trust and that she needed to start planning her life based on reality instead of fantasy. Lisa got angry and said I was being spiteful and that she was trying to be reasonable, but that I was forcing her to take this matter to court where a judge would make sure she got everything she deserved. I went inside and got the legal documents that Robert had prepared explaining the trust structure and the specific language that excluded any spousal claims, and I handed them to Lisa and told her to read them carefully and maybe call her lawyer to explain what they meant. Lisa started reading the papers and I watched her face change as she realized what she was looking at, and she kept flipping through the pages and reading the same sections over and over again like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Lisa started yelling that this wasn't fair and that she had been married to me when my parents died and that she should get something for all the years she invested in our relationship, and that there had to be some way to challenge the trust because it was designed to cheat wives out of their rightful inheritance. She said her lawyer had assured her that all marital assets were subject to division and that trusts were just another type of asset that could be split between spouses, and that Robert was trying to intimidate her with complicated legal language. I told Lisa that her lawyer was either incompetent or dishonest and that she had been wasting her money on legal fees for a case she could never win, and that maybe she should have thought about the financial consequences before she decided to cheat on me with her boss. Lisa said I was lying and that she was going to get a second opinion from another lawyer and that she was going to fight this until she got justice, and that I couldn't hide behind my parents' money forever. Lisa called Marcus from my driveway and I could hear her yelling at him through the phone and telling him that there was a problem with the trust fund and that they needed to talk to her lawyer immediately, and that maybe they had made a mistake about the timeline for getting the money. Marcus must have said something that made her even more angry because she started screaming that he promised her everything would work out and that he said they didn't need to worry about money and that she had left her marriage for him based on his assurances about their future. I watched Lisa pace back and forth in my driveway while she argued with Marcus on the phone, and she kept looking at the legal papers and shaking her head, and I could tell she was finally starting to understand that her whole plan was falling apart. She hung up on Marcus and came back to my front door and tried one more time to convince me that I should voluntarily share some of the trust money with her even if I wasn't legally required to do so. Lisa said she knew I was a good person deep down and that she was sorry about how things ended between us, but that she hoped I would be compassionate about her situation and help her out financially since she had given up her security to be with Marcus. She said she wasn't asking for millions anymore and that she would be happy with just enough money to pay off her credit cards and maybe put a down payment on a small house, and that she thought I owed her that much after 6 years of marriage. I told Lisa that she owed me an apology for cheating on me while my father was dying and for abandoning me right after my parents' funeral and for trying to steal money that belonged to my family, and that she would never get a single penny from me no matter how desperate she became. Lisa started crying and saying that she had made mistakes but that she didn't deserve to be punished forever, and that Marcus had promised to take care of her and that she had trusted him when he said everything would work out financially. I closed the door and watched from the window as Lisa sat in her car crying and talking on the phone, and I could see her showing the legal papers to whoever she was talking to and shaking her head and wiping her eyes. She sat there for about 20 minutes before she finally drove away, and I could tell she was starting to realize that her Italian vacation might have been the last expensive trip she would be taking for a very long time. Robert called me later and said that Lisa's lawyer had contacted him asking for another meeting to discuss the trust fund, and that Robert had explained once again that there was nothing to discuss because the trust was completely protected from any spousal claims. Robert said Lisa's lawyer sounded frustrated and confused, and that he seemed to be realizing that he had been giving his client bad legal advice and that he was probably worried about malpractice issues if Lisa decided to sue him for incompetence. Final update: the divorce was finalized 3 days ago and Lisa got exactly what I said she would get, which was about $37,000 from the house equity and half of our joint checking account, which was $2,400. Lisa's total take from our marriage was less than $40,000, and she spent more than $15,000 on legal fees trying to challenge the trust fund, so she actually walked away with about $25,000 and a pile of credit card debt from her European vacation with Marcus. Lisa called me the day after the divorce was final, and she was crying and begging me to reconsider giving her some money from the trust fund and saying that she was desperate and didn't know how she was going to survive, and that Marcus had told her that his business was having problems and that he couldn't support both of them on his income. She said she had made terrible mistakes but that she was willing to do anything to make things right and that she would sign any kind of agreement I wanted if I would just help her get back on her feet financially. I told Lisa that she made her choices and now she had to live with the consequences, and that I wasn't her safety net anymore, and that she should have thought about her financial security before she decided to blow up our marriage for a man who lied to her about his wealth. Lisa said she understood that I was angry but that she was genuinely scared about her future and that she had nowhere else to turn, and that she was willing to admit that leaving me was the biggest mistake of her life. I hung up on Lisa and blocked her number, but she kept calling from different phones and leaving voicemails saying that Marcus was pressuring her to get money from me and that their relationship was falling apart because of the financial stress, and that she realized now that Marcus had only been interested in her because he thought she was going to be rich. Lisa said she would do anything to undo what she had done and that she missed our life together and that she had been stupid and naive about Marcus and his promises. Robert called me yesterday and said he had received a very interesting phone call from a woman named Patricia who said she was Marcus's wife and that she had some information that might interest me regarding Marcus and Lisa's relationship. Robert said Patricia wanted to meet with both of us to discuss what she had discovered about her husband's affair and that she had documentation that might be useful if I wanted to pursue any legal action against Marcus for interfering with my marriage. I met Patricia at Robert's office, and she turned out to be a sharp woman in her 50s who worked as a forensic accountant and who had been married to Marcus for 18 years before she found out about his affair with Lisa. Patricia said she had hired a private investigator to document Marcus's cheating and that she had discovered that Marcus had been telling Lisa lies about his financial situation and his business success, and that he had borrowed money against their family home to pay for the expensive trips and gifts he had been giving Lisa. Patricia showed me bank records that proved Marcus had taken out a second mortgage on their house and had maxed out several credit cards to fund his lifestyle with Lisa, and that his business was actually losing money and had been for the past 2 years. Patricia said Marcus had been living off their savings and home equity to maintain the appearance of success, and that he had told Lisa he was wealthy when he was actually drowning in debt and facing possible bankruptcy. Patricia said she had filed for divorce from Marcus the same day that my divorce from Lisa was finalized, and that she was seeking full ownership of their house and business assets, and that Marcus was going to be left with nothing but debt and legal fees. She said Marcus had no idea that she knew about his financial deception and that he was still trying to convince Lisa that everything would work out once they figured out a way to get money from my trust fund. Robert suggested that Patricia and I coordinate our legal strategies to make sure that both Marcus and Lisa faced maximum consequences for their affair in their attempts to defraud our families, and Patricia agreed that they both deserved to lose everything for what they had done. Patricia said she had already frozen all of Marcus's business accounts and credit cards, and that he was discovering that he had no access to money and no way to pay for his expensive lifestyle with Lisa. Patricia also told me that she had contacted Marcus's biggest business clients and informed them about his financial problems and his unprofessional conduct, and that several of them had already canceled their contracts with his company. She said Marcus was about to lose his office lease because he couldn't make the rent payments, and that his business was collapsing because of his poor financial decisions and his focus on his affair instead of his work. I drove past the apartment complex where Lisa had been living with Marcus and saw a moving truck in the parking lot, and Lisa was carrying boxes out of the building and loading them into her car, and she looked exhausted and defeated. I found out later that Marcus had been evicted from his apartment because he couldn't pay the rent, and that Lisa had been forced to move back in with her sister because she couldn't afford her own place. Lisa showed up at my house 2 nights ago and she looked terrible, and she was crying and begging me to take her back and saying that she had learned her lesson and that she would never betray me again, and that she realized now that Marcus was a liar and a fraud who had destroyed her life with his false promises. Lisa said she would sign a prenup or any other legal document I wanted, and that she would spend the rest of her life making up for her mistakes if I would just give her another chance. I told Lisa that our marriage was over forever and that she had burned every bridge between us when she chose to cheat on me and abandon me during the worst time of my life, and that I would never trust her or want her back no matter how desperate she became. Lisa said she understood that I hated her, but that she was homeless and broke, and that she didn't know what she was going to do, and that Marcus had disappeared and wasn't answering her calls, and that she had no one else to help her. I told Lisa that she should have thought about all of this before she decided to trade our marriage for a fantasy about money and a man who was lying to her about everything, and that her problems weren't my responsibility anymore, and that she needed to figure out her own life without expecting me to rescue her. Lisa got angry and said that I was cruel and heartless, and that she had learned her lesson, and that I was being vindictive by refusing to help her when she was desperate. I went inside and locked the door, and Lisa sat in my driveway crying for about an hour before she finally left, and I haven't seen her since then. But I heard from her sister that Lisa is working 2 part-time jobs and living in a studio apartment, and that she is barely making ends meet, and that she regrets everything that happened and wishes she could go back in time and make different choices. Patricia texted me yesterday and said that Marcus had declared bankruptcy, and that he was living in a cheap motel and working as a delivery driver, and that his business had officially closed, and that he was facing several lawsuits from creditors and former clients. She said Marcus had tried to contact her begging for forgiveness and asking her to help him financially, but that she had told him he made his choices and now he had to live with the consequences just like Lisa did. I'm finally starting to feel like I can move forward with my life and focus on positive things instead of dwelling on Lisa and Marcus and their betrayal and their stupid schemes to get money that was never theirs to begin with. The house feels peaceful now that all the legal drama is over, and I'm making plans to travel and maybe start dating again when I'm ready, and I'm grateful that my parents were smart enough to protect our family wealth from people like Lisa who think they can cheat their way to easy money.